Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Dan Banchero Show, only on YouTube. I'm your host, as if it'd be somebody else, Dan Banchero. I like to have eye-catching and titles that people can relate to and can identify with. That's why I chose the title that I did this week for 2012. After all, like I've said in the past, this is a family show. So 2019 has been a rewarding year so far. Been a little bit prosperous, been a little bit nostalgic, if you will. I got to go hiking out to the beautiful Marin Headlands on New Year's Day with Alicia, and it was nice looking over the Pacific Ocean. It's gorgeous weather. I'd like to also congratulate my two cousins. First, Alicia and her husband Angelo announcing their pregnancy, and second, my other cousin Natalie and her newlywed husband Evan. Wishing you all a gifted 2019. I got to attend my first Warriors game of the year, seeing them smash the New York Knicks 128-95. Shout out Giancarlo Mustafic. The great Klay Thompson dropped 43 on you, and that was a pretty embarrassing game. But I actually been having the opportunity to run into a couple of my classmates from St. Dunstan's School. First, I ran into Megan O'Malley and her husband and her family over at this restaurant that I work at a couple days a week. I got to be their waiter that night, and a couple days later, I got to run into the great Greg Camoli, who was picking up his children from school at St. Gregory's. I was heading over to the church to take one of my prospects over to say a set of 40 prayers. He's on his way of changing his life, and it's good to see Greg. So shout out St. Dunstan's Knights, class of 1993. Shout out plaid skirts and brown corduroy pants. So we left off at the start of 2012 last time, and life was about to get real tough, and my thoughts and my actions were causing all of this. I was facing a lot of challenges due to the situations I had chosen to get myself into. It was getting real ugly. I remember New Year's Day 2012, I was working at the Elephant Bar in Burlingame. I was doing a dinner serving shift, and a couple of the girls that I worked with, they decided to get started in with the boozing that night. So both the bartender and one of the servers that I had a relapse at prior to, we went to a 49er game a few months before that, she had admitted to me that she had a drinking problem, and she was sneaking drinks. She had some issues with alcoholism. She was obviously wasted, but she would come down from the cocktail area where she was working that night. That was her station. I was working in the banquet room, and where I was working, and she had a kid's cup that was full of whiskey that the bartender was serving her, right? So she began coming down. She was making advances. We had hooked up a little here and there, and she was making advances towards me, and we had a couple brief makeout sessions over at the point of sale station over at the register there when nobody was looking. So she eventually asked me to go and cover her station, and she went into the bathroom for like 20 or 30 minutes, and she never came out, and everybody's looking around for her. So a customer happened to be in the bathroom, and they reported a woman being passed out in the stall. So they woke her up. She ended up fleeing the scene, and needless to say, that was her last day at work. I had refrained from drinking that day, luckily, but I felt guilty for engaging in that behavior and condoning her drinking. The bartender was approached regarding her drinking also on the job, and she ended up telling off the management, and she ended up quitting, and it was also her last day. So for those two girls in that condition at work, where was the cocaine when they needed it? Because they were not alert and they were not on top of their game. So anyway, I remember a few days later, I decided to go tie one on real good in the early afternoon, and I had a crush on this other server. She was actually completely the opposite of me. She was really sassy. She was a real big-time complainer, but man, she was attractive. She had it going on, man. And so I remember I was loaded riding the Samtrans bus, and I made my way to Hillsdale Mall, and I went into Macy's, and I financed a gold necklace with a gold heart attached to it on the end. So I'm doing this hammered, right? And as I've said in other episodes, I got the shopping problem when I'm drunk. So I jumped back on the 292 Samtrans northbound bus, and I I went to the Elephant Bar for my dinner shift, and I stopped off at El Torito on the way in for a couple of pops. And I went into work, and there I discreetly, went and I handed it to her, and she was shocked, and she tried not to accept it, but I insisted, and I made it through the shift, luckily. But I woke up completely embarrassed and mad at myself the next morning for going to spend this kind of money on something with a chick that I didn't even hook up with. So, the Elephant Bar, when I worked there, we had this great management team. I got to say, I learned so much from the general manager, Andrew Michelson, at the time about the flow of service in a busy corporate restaurant. And Rudy Hernandez was a great manager too. He showed me how to practice great composure. He applied a lot of wisdom that he had learned through the years. And then we had Alec, Brian, and Kelly, who were very supportive and helpful young managers that made such an effective workplace for me and others. And I'll forever be grateful for that experience getting to work there with those guys. They really showed me a lot. But unfortunately, my behavior wasn't getting any better. I was still really just frustrated with the whole parenting thing going on, and we're going to court and all this stuff, and I was getting to see my daughter, but I just wasn't happy. I'm still disgruntled about losing my license from the fourth DUI the year before. And anyway, I stopped working at Leonardo's at the end of 2011, and I got a job at that was a little more high paying, being I got tips. I got hired at the Kingfish restaurant in San Mateo, and I began training, doing some lunch shifts before I'd go into the Elephant Bar. So about 3 weeks later, I went on a bad bender, and it began with me going to the liquor store across the street from the movie theater there on B Street in San Mateo. And I'd buy the small little airplane bottles of gin and vodka, and then I'd go next door to Pete's Coffee, and I'd order up a Pellegrino Aranciata or Limonata, and I'd ask for a cup of ice, and I'd go into the bathroom. I'd mix me up a couple cocktails, and then I'd take the cocktail over across the street, and I'd go sit on the benches over there by that ivy brick wall in front of the movie theater with other derelicts, and go drink in front of the movie theater before I'd start my shift. Well, one day I was enjoying this cocktail and other shooters, and I saw my old friend John Wright, and me and John, we were talking this day, and we laugh about the old days about him and his deceased brother Jeff, who was one of my best friends growing up on Lincoln Circle in Millbrae. That one day he invited me to go visit his mother, who was staying over at Mills Hospital a couple blocks away, Harriet, and she was in bad health, and I hadn't seen her since Jeff's funeral in 2009, 3 years prior. So I remember when we went to the hospital to go surprise her and say hello, and I bent over to go give her a hug and a kiss, and she gave me a whiff, and she goes, "Danny, you've been drinking," and I laughed, and I didn't deny it, but I smiled, and I told her I'd be all right, but little did I know that it'd be the last time I'd see her, and it wasn't going to be all right. I was on my way down a bad 6 month period. So if I wasn't starting my day in the Pete's Coffee bathroom mixing cocktails, I was going to a small little breakfast place. They serve lunch too. It's a little cafe on Old Bayshore. I think it's called Joe's. It's down the street from the Elephant Bar, and they sold beer and wine for whatever reason at this location. And once in a while I'd get like a breakfast bagel or something to get going, but usually I'd have 2 or 3 bottles of DTM Weisers, or as known to the layperson, Budweisers. And I get my day going before a shift, and I got away with it again, and at my clean and sober house at the time on Bellevue. And this one night I ended up going out with that fun redheaded server. She was real wild. She was funny as hell, boy. We'd go over to the Marriott Lounge, and we'd have a couple pops, and we ended up at the Vagabond Inn. We hung out, and she'd take off, and I'd be by myself. And so the next day, I rolled through the next day, and I couldn't stop. I remember I called my buddy Nick Burrows, and I asked him if we could watch a football game on that night, and he agreed. And he told me, come on over, and we could hang out. And I told him what was going on, and I told him I was drinking and couldn't go home. So I went over there, and we watched the game. We ate some pizza. I think we had some wings and shit too. But that was my first full 12-pack that I dusted that night in over a year and a half. And I remember I passed out that night just feeling pathetic, being on my buddy's couch with a 12-pack, just feeling very immature, very irresponsible. I woke up the next morning just spinning. His girlfriend Mel was still at home, and I was late for work. They're married, with kids now, but so I called up management and I told them that I'd overslept. I wasn't going to make it into Kingfish. And so I was looking through my cell phone. And I'm looking at these text messages. So I remember I slapped my head. I'm reading these text messages, and I sent these sexually explicit and vulgar messages to the sober girl that I had met and became friends with. And I was so embarrassed. I called her promptly and I apologized. And luckily, being the free spirit that she is to this day, she laughed and she accepted my proposed amendment. And it's all good. But to this day, whenever I see her, I still can't help but think about some of the... I can't even say it on camera. Now, I've revealed a lot of in these shows. I can't even say the things I was saying. But every time I see her, it's kind of embarrassing. So I eventually got terminated for no call, no show that day at Kingfish. And after 3 weeks, and I went back working as many double shifts as I could at the Elephant Bar on the days where I wasn't visiting Stella. So I went without a drink for about 30 days again. I was still attending a few groups per week. I'd go at the mornings at Friendship Hall. I'd go to other groups in San Carlos and Burlingame at various times. But I still had no mentor to guide me. I wasn't praying. I wasn't reading. I wasn't doing all the things that I should have realized that was helping me before, So one Monday I decided to pick up a dinner shift, and it's for a few extra bucks. And I was going to work, and I stopped back into the El Torito bar and I had a couple pops before I clocked in. And during my shift, I started ordering whiskeys and 7-Up to fake tables I had created. And I'd go and I'd take these drinks and I'd intercept them at the well, pretending to go deliver them to the tables. And what was happening was I'd go to the banquet area, and there was no security cameras in the banquet area from what I remember. So I'd go there, I'd pound down these drinks, and I'm paying cash for these things out of pocket like a fool, So I probably had about 3 or 4 of them. And, I felt great. I was getting all flirtatious with the other servers. They're all like 10 years younger than me, and we're all having a good time. And I remember ringing in an order, and I began doing a dance, and I was dropping it like it was hot over and over again. My ass was hitting the floor, and I'm coming back up, and I'm telling the girls to spank me on the way back up and on the way back down, and they're all engaged in it. And this is catching looks from certain people, and people are watching this go down, and this suspicious behavior drew some attention to me, And one of the bartenders apparently told the management that she believed that I was drinking these drinks and I was ordering on these fake tables. And so I was pulled in the office by this guy, Steve, who had just been promoted. He's a cool guy, and I was sent home, and needless to say, it was my last day after a couple of warnings prior to that. So I knew I was probably going to get terminated. So I was walking out. I remember walking out the door, and I was crying. I was hugging some of the servers and saying goodbye, and they didn't really know what was going on. I just told them that I had messed up, and I had to get let go, man. It just I wasn't. I needed to get some professional help, and have it on paper that I was trying to get better in order for me to come back. And I just it's just the way it went. If I was going to return, I had to do these things. So I remember I walked out the door. I went over to the Marriott cocktail lounge and had a few more drinks, and I returned over to the El Torito bar afterwards, and I saw a couple of my coworkers there, and I was pleading my pathetic case to them, and got even more hammered. And I believe I went back over to the Elephant Bar. I remember there was this well-known prostitute that would solicit her services over at the bar over there, and she was well-known, and I was trying to set up an appointment with her in this drunken stupor. And anyway, it didn't happen, and I was out of money. And I remember I called this cab, and I was waiting for the cab, and I called my house manager. I told him what was going on, and I didn't even know where I was going. I got in the cab, and I left my phone in the cab, and I tried to get back in my house to get some clean clothes, and I tried to sneak in. The house manager of the Clean and Sober House caught me, chases me out, calls the cops. I ended up getting picked up at a bus stop in El Camino by the San Mateo police, and this dude I know, Kurt Rodenspiel, he was helping me out. He got me a ride. They didn't take me into custody. He took me over the first chance I could go sleep it off. So that was good of him. I always appreciated that night. And so I ended up nearly going to jail. And I remember I woke up from first chance, and I was able to get some clothes the next morning from the house. And I got some dress clothes because I promptly wanted to go out and get another job. My pride always, I can't just relax. I think about my daughter. When you lose jobs, I can't take time for myself to get my mind right at this point. And I had to go out and try to get a job. But so I'd go out, and I think I applied a few places in this nice collared shirt and these slacks, and I ended up drinking some more and ended up drunk all day. I had nowhere to go, and then I ended up calling my longtime friend, Luca Cingolani, who was staying on a boat harbored outside of what was then called AT&T Park in San Francisco. And, I drank all night alone, and he went out and left me there on the boat, and he went out to the bars with some friends, and I couldn't exit. I couldn't come out to be locked in there, and there's no restroom. And I'd have to urinate off the side of the boat, and then I'd have to hang onto a bar and hang off the boat and squat in order to get to go number 2, because I was hit with explosive diarrhea from the drinking. What a mess. So I was very, very just down and out. And, the explosive diarrhea caused, skid marks on my slacks. I had some vomit on my nice collared shirt. I looked like hell. I had no wipes to clean myself up, and part of that is I'd stopped wearing underwear in 1998. Underwear of all forms, some of you might know. So it was a big, big disaster. And I remember I looked out to the sky, and I looked out to the bay, and I'm just like, what the hell happened? What am I doing? Just feeling totally pathetic. So I was there that morning, and I remember a longtime friend, Phil Gratzenopoulos, he called me up that morning and eventually picked me up in the city from the boat, a few blocks down from the ballpark, and we went down to meet up with Danny D and Brian for lunch, and we went down to the deli, and I was just so ashamed. And I remember Phil offered to let me stay at his house in San Mateo for a few days that he was residing at, and he fed me and gave me a bit of lecturing for my bad behavior, but my screwed up choices. We'd barbecue at night and watch some TV. He'd go out to work during the day. I'd go out looking for jobs, or I'd go out and hang out with Stella. And, we went out to the gym a couple times, and I was there for about 5 days, and Phil somehow got a hold of Bill Boston-Zoglu, and Bill invited me to come live with him and Shaheen and San Bruno, and I was so insecure and so nervous. I tried having a couple drinks, no more than 3 per day, just to taper off until I could quit completely. And I was driving Bill nuts because he didn't know what to do with me, He didn't want to be an enabler, is what it came down to. And I got a job at a Red Hot Chili Pepper restaurant in San Carlos, and I only lasted about 2 weeks there, as I was angry at a busser for taking the tips off of the table. I caught him, and I didn't get paid my tips later on that night. So the next time I came in, I remember I had a couple beers earlier in the day, and I went and I told off the manager and took my money. I stormed off, and I made a scene, and lost the other job directly because of just the fact that I had been drinking earlier in the day, and I wasn't drunk, but just that irritable behavior, entitled behavior. So I remember the next day I went to the Mills Hospital. I was actually St. Patrick's Day. I went to Mills Hospital in San Mateo. I got some meds. I got the IVs in, and now I'm at the point in my alcoholism where if I'm going to stop drinking, I need to go to the hospital just to be able to stop. And that's it. That's just all it comes down to. I need to get the meds. I need something to taper off. I need to go to sleep. It's really, really sad state of affairs. And I remember I was laying on this air mattress, just feeling totally pathetic. I'm in my buddy's garage on an air mattress, laying there, can't sleep, trying to get detox from booze. I laid there overnight, and it was totally just miserable. I remember I'd asked a new friend I'd met, Ken K. I met him about a year prior, and I asked him to be my mentor and help me get another attempt at sobriety going. So he quickly got me a questionable but well-intentioned part-time job at the Carlos Club in San Carlos as a bouncer or security guard or whatever you want to call it. And that was kind of a joke. I wasn't drinking at this point. I had put together about 3 weeks of abstinence from booze. But I was so frustrated. I get off at 2 a.m. after everybody would leave, and then I have to take all these buses back to San Bruno in the cold. I wouldn't get back till 4 a.m. Now you have to get off at the IHOP there in South City, and then to call a cab to get to Bill's house, and it wasn't worth it. I was making a measly $15 an hour for 4 hours of work, and I was just so low. I just drank again, and I remember it was Easter Sunday, and Bill finally just told me it was time for me to go. He had some tears in his eyes. He felt terrible about it, but he couldn't do it. He tried to help me, but I was beyond human aid, and he had gone through his liquor, and he had all his liquor on his counter. He'd seen how much had gone down over the weeks of me staying there, and liquor was disappearing. It was missing from various bottles, and he had quite a bit missing after that 2 months. We did have some funny times, though, me, him, and Shane. We did laugh a lot. It was a good time. It was good getting caught up with those guys. So Bill had arranged for me to go live with our other buddy, Anthony Glue, at the time up in San Francisco, in Noe Valley. And I stayed for a few weeks. I applied for other jobs. I took some side gigs with this Total Success staffing company as a banquet server, mostly at events at Stanford University, just to get some money in my pocket. And Anthony and I had a lot of fun during those few weeks. You know, we'd eat pizza, we'd eat burritos, we'd play some gin rummy and other card games. You know, we'd watch old reruns on TV. You know, we'd take his dog Dexter out, and our lives had gone distant over the years, just through changes of, you know, dating other women and new jobs and moving around, and we had a good time catching up. We just became distant through the years after the Sleepy Hollow Lane era from 2005 and 2006. So it was good. And he let me stay there, and yeah, I got on my feet, and I was able to move into a clean and sober house in May of 2012, and Anthony graciously fronted me the first month's rent for me to get in the joint. It was nice having a room again. I had some stuff, some TV, and I got a little bed, had my little radio, and you know, I'd meet Stella to go to the park. It was convenient. It was close to public transportation to get wherever I needed to go. But I just couldn't stay in a state of gratitude for anything. I was still just focusing on the negative and how I was wronged, and yeah, I was upset with myself over what I was doing. And I felt like a really, really insignificant, just lowly human being. And eventually I got a serving job at a Meech's Pizza, and it only lasted 3 days, as they told me that I wasn't the right fit. They said I wasn't moving fast enough or something, which I thought was a joke. I saw some of these servers there, and you know, I get off work, and these guys are all chowing down all this food. Management, too. They're drinking the wine. I was just like, how's a corporate restaurant like this where they're letting all these people get away with this? So I was just growing. I think they probably had smelled my breath, and I was having those cocktails again over Pete's Coffee in the morning, and I think they probably smelled some vodka or gin on my breath when I was mixing with the aranciadas and the limonadas. But I don't really know, you know. But the day I found out that I was getting let go, earlier in that day, I had gotten a call, and I was at the park with Stella and Shauna, and Pete's Coffee called me back after 7 interviews in 9 weeks. And I got offered a management position. I was going to be taken into the Belmont store on El Camino. And I was to train at Bay Meadows, which is the training store there in San Mateo. So I'd started training there at the Bay Meadows location, but I had an issue getting there at 4 a.m. with no car. There was no transportation that was running, buses or trains in the vicinity for me to get to work. So Anthony hooked me up with a bike, but it had no brakes. So I'm riding this bike, you know, 3:30 in the morning across San Mateo over to Hillsdale Boulevard. It's freezing cold, and there's no brakes, and it was frustrating. I started drinking again, and you know, me and Ken were meeting regularly, and I was seeing Stella, and I was going through training at Pete's Coffee, and you know, I still wasn't happy, so I started drinking. Still no gratitude, you know, very unhumble, whatever you want to say. So I remember I'd be at work, and I'd go across the parking lot on my breaks, and I'd go into Whole Foods. I'd buy small bottles of sake and wine, and I'd be pounding them in the bathroom before returning to work. And I try to cover up the smell of the hooch with espresso or coffee. You know, some mornings I crave the booze so bad that I sip mouthwash like Scope or Listerine as I was waiting to get led into work outside. And I remember I think I got caught a couple times by one of the employees watching me pound these huge gulps of this blue mouthwash down. It's disgusting. About my 6th week in, I didn't have the ability to show up one morning. I called out sick. A few days later, I was at a Barnes & Noble with Stella and Sean, and I bent down to read Stella a book on the floor. And as I went down, I heard a pop, and my knee was in all this pain. I thought I tore something, or I didn't know what was going on, but I was limping all over. And luckily, the pain had gone away a few days later, and I had to wear a brace, and I was taking painkillers, and nothing was happening. But I never went to the doctor about it. And I remember I just went to work one morning. I just really wanted to get loaded. You know, I lied to my manager, and I told her that I had taken a Vicodin for my knee injury, and I wasn't feeling right. And she asked me if it was prescribed, and I was honest. I told her, no, it's not prescribed. So she sent me home, and then she called me back couple days later, and she said she had to terminate me per human resources orders for using an unprescribed substance. So my lie had backfired on me, and I was a mess again. I went on a huge alcoholic run with a final check that I got from them. I'd fumble around downtown San Mateo to liquor stores and bars like McGovern's, and I'd clean it up for a few days, and I'd apply for jobs, and I'd go see Stella, and I'd go back to my misery and proceed to get drunk. And some days it was so bad, I'd get up. This is the kind of behavior that happens when in my alcoholic psychosis. It's like I'm right back to that childish, sick, this mind. I get up, I go over to 7-Eleven, I buy the 2 tall cans of Steel Reserve, I go over to Jack in the Box, and I get a little sandwich in me, like a breakfast Jack or something. I go in the bathroom, I pound one of the Steel Reserves, I put the other one in my backpack, I march over to the Jaybird adult pornographic video store and novelties, and I go into these pornographic movie booths, and I drink beer and sexually assault myself. So, feeling, this is what average 33-year-old men are doing in their at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday. This is what I had going on. Yeah, I was partying, but one day, unfortunately, due to an unfortunate circumstance, I found out what a glory hole was. So here I am, watching a show with my pants around my knees, and a man stuck his hand through the hole, invited me to stick my penis through it. So I freaked out, and I said, I'm getting the F out of here, and I ran out of the store, and I yelled at the clerk, and I told him what was going on about this peeping pervert. And I'd still go get loaded, and I'd come back to the store, and I'd come in, I'd tell the clerk I'd have to request for a booth with no holes. So I'd come in and go, no holes, and he'd say, no holes, and, he'd tell me to go to the left or whatever. Absolutely ridiculous. Can you believe this? So, I'd go back numerous times on these sprees, and, eventually me and the clerk, we'd had a good chuckle about it. I became a regular. Again, this is what a 33-year-old man with a daughter who is unemployed has got going on during weekdays in the afternoon. Unbelievable. What a degenerate. So I remember trying to buy booze at the corner store on 4th Avenue. It was around the corner from my clean and sober house. And I put 2 40-ounce bottles of beer on the counter, and I was so blasted I passed out on the floor trying to buy up. And I went to reach for my money. I laid there on the floor in front of the register, and the owner of the store told me I was no longer able to buy booze there. And I made about 15 steps out the door, and I collapsed and passed out again, flat on my back on the sidewalk. I was lucky I didn't get arrested. But, there's nothing I could do. I was not doing anything in my heart in regarding to my recovery. I was simply following instructions and complying with whatever Ken was telling me to do and behaving in ways that were not going to propel me to where I needed to be, Numerous times after this whole little small period, I remember going in front of the mirror, and I'd look at myself in the mirror and say, Dan, you are degenerate. That's all it came down to. So, I didn't get much into any inspirational quotes or anything, but I did want to take something from the Harry Thibault collective writings. On page 43, he said, "It is only when real surrender occurs that compliance is knocked out of the picture, freeing the individual for a series of wholehearted responses, including in the alcoholic, his acceptance of his illness and of his need to do something constructive about it." I needed to wholeheartedly want to do something. I needed to make a move. I couldn't just comply. I had to surrender, and I was not doing it at this time. And that's all I have time for to talk about the beginning of 2012. The ending of 2012, it got a little bit worse for a couple more weeks, but then I made a major move and got into another rehab. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Salvation Army in next time's episode. So it might take a couple weeks, but I want to thank you all for joining me. I hope I was able to, just enlighten you on how bad things can get. And I hope you all have a great weekend. And I'll see you next time. In the meantime, here's to feeling good all the time. Oh, it's pizza this week.